Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome to this amazing event tonight. My name is Shireen Gable and I am going to be the MC for tonight's regional heat of the Race Unity Speech Awards. It's my pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the Baha'i community who initiated these speech awards in 2001 in support of Race Relations Day. We are here tonight to hear speeches prepared by students in years 11, 12 and 13 on the topic of listen to understand. Whakarongo kia marama. So students in their speeches must address at least 2 of the following 5 questions in their speech. Number 1, how can listening to understand help individuals to respond to the challenges of diversity and isolation in our society? How can leaders demonstrate what listening to understand looks like in schools, workplaces, community organisations, government and elsewhere? What have you learned from your elders, from leaders or role models about the actions, attitudes and values we can spread to replace racism? How do you intend to apply what you've learnt? Number 4, listening to understand is distinctly different to listening to rebut or criticise. So how can genuine listening lead to improved racial harmony in Aotearoa New Zealand? What actions need to follow the listening to improve racial harmony? And lastly, how do we create and sustain anti-racism practices that prioritise building connections, inclusion and dispelling prejudices over confronting or fighting racism? So some really good challenging questions in there. Students must also include at least 1 proverb or quotation in their speech, choosing from one of the following 3 options. Mā te rongo ka mōhio, mā te mōhio ka mātau, mā te mātau ka marama, mā te marama ka ora. So that means in English, through listening comes awareness, through awareness comes knowledge, through knowledge enlightenment, and through enlightenment well-being. So that's one of the options. Another option is from the Baha'i writings. When you meet those whose opinions differ from your own, do not turn away your face from them. All are seeking truth, and there are many roads leading thereunto. Truth has many aspects, but it remains always and forever one. And that's from Abdul Baha from the Baha'i writings. And then the third option was a relevant whakatauki or a whakatauaki or a quotation or a proverb from your own faith or your own cultural background. Okay, we have 8 speakers tonight. The student whom the judges consider to have delivered the best speech will go forward to the national semi-finals, which will take place in Auckland on Saturday the 9th of May, and if successful at that level, they will go to the national finals, which is the next day, Sunday the 10th of May. If they're unable to participate in the national semi-finals for some reason, then the person with the next highest points will go in their place. Our judges tonight are from the New Zealand Police, Multicultural New Zealand and the Baha'i community. I now invite them to each introduce themselves and to speak briefly about their organisation's support of the Speech Awards and why they think it is of value. So let's start with our Chief Judge.
It's always a privilege and an inspiration to be part of to hear our young people speak at the Race Unity Speech Awards. I've had a number of roles within it, including being a part of the support team in the regionals, emceeing at different times, judging at different times, and it's wonderful to be here and actually to see a number of speakers who have returned this year, who were either here last year and another the year before. Hiri Moani was part of our Baha'i community, and I think of a an extract from the Baha'i writings which instructs us to be anxiously concerned about the needs of the age in which we live. That's from Baha'u'llah, Prophet Founder of the Baha'i Faith. The initiation of these awards and their carriage forward and the Baha'i community's national support for them comes from that impulse, that directive. In the late 90s, Hedi Moani recognised with shock, a migrant himself, race-motivated assaults or abuse, and talk of neo-Nazi groupings and that kind of rhetoric that came up in Auckland. And he approached the then race relations conciliator and consulted with Rajan Prasad, and from that initiative there was a race unity rally in Auckland, and subsequently it has evolved into listening to the voice of our youth and engaging our secondary school system to speak on this matter.
Sorry, ko Drakensberg te Maunga, ko Tugela te Awa, ko Indian Ocean te Moana, ko Afrika ki te tonga no Hiratonga aho, ko Roswana Lati toko inua. Good evening everyone, and my name is Roswana Lati. It is both an honor and a privilege to be here today. I have been doing this for a few years now, and every year it gets even more difficult to judge. As we just observed Race Unity Day on Saturday, we remember how important these topics on race unity and the deep significance that it has for Aotearoa New Zealand, and for me personally growing up in apartheid South Africa. It reminds me not only of standing together against racism, but also actively building our community grounded in respect, understanding and genuine connection. In a region as diverse as Hawke's Bay, this kaupapa is particularly important. Each of our speakers has taken the courage and to step up and stand and share their voices on an issue that matters to all. And as judges, we're not looking for the perfect speech, we're looking for listening for authenticity and the message that has the power to challenge, inspire, and bring people together. So thank you to our speakers. Thank you for taking the time and the energy to do this. And also thank you to our whānau and supporters who are here today. Kia ora.
Ko manaia te maunga, ko te rerenga parawa te maunga, ko whangarei aho. I was born, ko Brendan Dyke toko ingoa. So I was born and raised in Whangarei, but I now call Waitangi Hastings my home. As a child, I led a reasonably normal life for a New Zealand European child until when I was about 7 years old. My family moved to the Netherlands for 3 years, and I was in a expatriate school with a number of children from all around the country, all around the world. I had friends from Asia, from the from Americas, Europe, and other parts of the world. And to me, that was a gift. It was a privilege. It wasn't something that a lot of New Zealanders had the experience of, particularly growing up in 1990s New Zealand, which was not a very diverse place at that time. So that's something that I hold quite dear to myself and as part of me. As you can see, I'm a New Zealand police officer. I have been for 17, 18 years. I work in intelligence. I'm an intelligence supervisor. Part of that role is managing the information flows into the police, and that ranges from burglary trends in Clive to national security risks and counter-terrorism and those sorts of things. And you can imagine that that role. I deal with things or people that are the product of when race unity and race relations does break down. And that is part of our country and our world, whether we like it or not. And I think these kind of events and this kind of experiences, bringing people together, really makes a massive difference to pushing back against those more harmful and darker sort of themes. I really like the theme this year, listening to understand. That is very, very dear to me, both personally and professionally. In the police, I have had the responsibility and the privilege to encounter people in their hour of most need, whether that's trauma or whatever. Usually when people deal with the police, they're at rock bottom. Sometimes there's not a lot we can do to help them, but what we can do is listen to their story. And there's something powerful about stories. You can connect with people on a different level when you just spend some time and listen to their story, regardless of what that is. So I really can't wait. I really enjoy the perspectives of youth. You don't have the cynicism that some of us have developed over the years that we've been alive. And I know you've put a lot of effort into your speeches, and I'm just really looking forward to what you've got to say.
They say the strongest weapons are words, not swords, not guns, not blades, not anything that's able to stab, penetrate, or pierce. The reason why this is because words don't fade. Words stick around. They hit us much deeply than any armor could protect, than any thick shell can hide. But what good are words that fall on deaf ears? What good is a story that's told? What's good is a story that's told, then forgotten in the same breath? What good are these words if no one listens to them? My people across the streets of Africa have cried out for dignity, have cried out to be treated like people, have cried out to step on their own land, and yet no one heard their cries. History tells us all about the marches, the violent protests, all about the actions taking place. But what they never mention is the people who bothered to listen to those issues in the first place. A movement can't be started if no one had listened to the issue presented in the first place. A community can't be built if you don't take the time to listen to your friends, your family, and those around you. We hear all about the flags that were raised, the speeches that have been told, and the marches that have captivated us. But before the cry rang out, someone had to listen. Someone had to sit with that, sit with the pain, sit with the weight of someone else's problems. Someone had to listen. Because when you listen to understand, when you truly listen, what you are doing is you're opening the door. It can be difficult. You have to hear about someone's pain, someone's experience, someone's fear, and someone's anger. Listening to understand is not listening to reply. It's not listening to argue or defend. It's listening to understand. To have the capability to admit that you're wrong. To have the capability to understand that you don't know anything, and you fundamentally can't as a person. You will never meet one person from every single culture out there. It's impossible to have done that in our short lifetimes. So those you do meet, it's important you listen. Not reply, not wait, but you listen. There were men who did exactly that in our history. Nelson Mandela listened to the cries of the people crushed under the apartheid before he started his rallies. Martin Luther King listened to the communities who thought they had no dignity. I stand here today, proud, brown-skinned with my curly hair and big lips. And I stand here, as many of our speakers will, as an echo of these ideals that have been spoken for all these years. Because these ideals should never be forgotten. Everyone here who listens to these speeches represents a wall. For how an echo is created is when voices bounce off of those walls. You take what you hear and you bounce it off to the next person. There is a Zulu proverb, a Zulu philosophy called Ubuntu. Ubuntu states, "Umatu na matu na buntu." This means a person is a person through other people. No one is born knowing everything. No one is born with the knowledge to love, to speak, to ride a bike. You learn that from other people. And through this, somehow we've forgotten the fundamental skill of listening. We've forgotten to learn from other people. And when you forget to learn from other people, you see the ideas of ego. You see the ideas of pride. These are the very ideals that created the idea of racism, that created the idea that one man is better than another through the color of their skin, through where they're from. A fun fact about myself. I love superheroes, comic books, the stories we see on TVs, the fictional characters, all of them. And a particular one I would like to mention is Captain America. Captain America appears as the perfect white male, a super soldier, blue eyes, blonde hair. Why would I adore such a character that I don't resemble at all? Captain America was written by two Jewish writers, Jack Kirby and Joe Simons. And it's in seeing two Jewish writers writing about a character who is literally seen to punch Nazis on his comic book cover. What does that tell us? What do you take away from that? These were writers who wanted to fit in. These were writers who envisioned themselves in a way that allowed us to fit in. But when you strip away the layers, what else do we see? We see that we share ideals. Captain America, as popular as he is, on his covers, on the cover of his comic books, we see him punching Nazis, which is something that we can all agree is bad. Because underneath all the prejudice, underneath all the judgment, we all share common goals. Despite New Zealand being filled with diversity, being filled with people from across the land, you have people who threaten that. In our leaders, just last year, David Seymour tried to release a bill that would threaten the rights that the Maori had, threaten the Treaty of Waitangi, something built over generations and years. Because that's what happens when we have leaders who can't listen. When you have leaders that make assumptions for the people. When you have leaders who don't take into account the laws that they create because they didn't listen. Creating a law without listening is creating an assumption about a person, creating an assumption about a race. I ask you all today, to be the walls, take the words that I've spoken today and bounce them off to others. Thank you.
Look, here is a 17-year-old boy, prefect at his school, respected by most. He's proud of who he is, but struggles with his cultural identity. His cultural identity is hurt, but not from the people outside the border of his culture, instead within. He loses touch until he feels that he's not enough. You see him, but do you know him? Would you listen to his story? Ko kahurana ki toku maunga, ko ngā rororo toku awa, ko takitimu toku waka, ko ngāti kahanunu toku iwi, ko ngāti hinimanu toku hapu, ko mahu toku marae. Ko Sarah toku mama, ko Ellen toku papa, ko Jake Smith toku ingoa. I stand up here today with a heavy heart, a heart full of pain and understanding, because that story was about me. I am Māori, and I know I don't look like it at all. And if you saw me with my mum, you would probably be like, yeah, this guy is definitely full of it. And as much as it is funny to joke about here and there, sometimes it leaves me gutted, sitting in my room thinking, maybe I'm not Māori enough to claim that I'm even Māori. And I'm sure others, like myself, have thought the same. And the craziest thing about my experience with racism was that it came from other Māori. Matthew chapter 7 verse 5 says, "Take the log out of your own eye first, and then you will see clearly enough to take the splinter out of your brother's eye." And this is why I will always say, if we cannot listen within our own communities, how do we expect to listen across them? Unity doesn't begin at the borders between races, it begins with the conversations that we avoid within those borders. Now, before I get fully started, I would like to say that by no means necessary am I trying to say that I am more oppressed as a white Māori. I understand that the privilege of white skin has protected me in ways it has not protected others. But it is also important to understand as people that privilege does not cancel pain, and pain does not cancel privilege. Both can and do exist at once. Okay, let me give you some context as to why I started my speech the way I did. It was the start of the year. I was messaging away in a group chat until I was randomly attacked and called a fake plastic Māori for reasons like missing kapahaka, because I chose to follow basketball dreams instead. As the comments kept on coming, it felt like a knife was stabbed into my abdomen and twisted around repeatedly until I had enough and left the chat. But it wasn't the comments made that hurt me the most. It was the fact that no one listened out to my cries of pain, not even my own people. This was my turning point. This was the moment that I realized that racism doesn't only live within races, it lives in assumptions. Assumptions about how Māori should look. Because when a fair-skinned Māori goes up to grab an award with his iwi's been read out to follow, why do we look at them in disbelief, saying he or she isn't Māori? Assumptions about what makes someone enough, because nobody should be told that they are fake or plastic in their own skin. This is because assumptions only thrive in the absence of listening. I firmly believe in this year's kaupapa, whakarongo kia marama, listening to understand. But I also believe that the only way that this kaupapa can be put into place is when we think about how listening to understand can help individuals face the challenges of diversity and isolation in our society. Now, if you ask my mum or my dad about my own listening skills, they would probably say, not there, what is, listening is something that he fears. And that'd be partially true, because I've never been the greatest listener, especially in situations where I feel that I'm right. But that's the problem, isn't it? We all think we're right. And when we live in a society where everyone thinks they're right, nobody feels heard. Nobody is heard. The 2023 census provided that 17.8% of Aotearoa identified as Māori. That is almost 1 in 6 people. Among them, I know I'm not the only one with my story. Conversations across Aotearoa show that Māori who don't fit the stereotype are often questioned. Research like Te Kupunga show that identity-based discrimination is still a reality for many Māori today. And you see, listening to understand is like a river. Take my awa, Naruroro, as an example. Naruroro doesn't try to fight every rock it meets. It doesn't try to prove the rock that it's right and they're wrong. Instead, it flows, it moves, it listens. And eventually, even the hardest don't change. When we listen like that, flowing and open, we allow people to express who they really are. We stop trying to shape them into these made-up expectations. We listen, we learn. And let's be honest, diversity will always exist, but isolation is a choice, and listening is the decision that breaks that choice. But it is important to understand that listening alone is useless if action doesn't follow, because all listening is without action is silence with good intentions. And we need to understand that there is a difference between listening to rebut and listening to understand. One of those is about winning, the other is about connection. And if we truly want racial harmony in Aotearoa, then genuine listening must follow alongside courageous action. Because vision alone is merely a dream, action alone is merely passing time, but vision and action together can change the world. And I'm aware that sometimes that action could look like a challenging joke towards someone's identity. But my vision is that the action that follows alongside listening is one that creates spaces in our schools where culture isn't policed but celebrated. That action could be you asking someone about their whakapapa instead of assuming that you know their story. Because racial harmony isn't built when we all act and think the same. It is built when we learn how to move differently, cohesively. National health research shows that 14% of Māori experience racial discrimination each year. That is more than twice the rate of some other groups. But do we ever wonder why? Among them, it is known that 1 in 5 young people are already experiencing significant psychological distress. These are not just statistics, they are signals. Signals that when difference is met with judgment or rebuttal, connection breaks down. This is why the action that follows listening matters. Because racial harmony isn't built through our intentions, it's built through our decisions. To stand beside someone instead of laugh at them. To ask instead of assume. And to listen, not just with our ears, but with the courage to change what we do next. So I don't want you to walk away after this speech thinking, wow, cool story, bro, but what do you want me to do with all this information? Because instead of dropping it, I want you to carry it with you. I want this speech to give you a choice. Because the next time you hear someone's cultural identity being hurt, you have a choice. The next time you assume before you ask, you have a choice. You can either listen to rebut, or you can listen to understand. And through this, we can create racial harmony in Aotearoa. Racial harmony that won't be built off of policies or slogans alone. It will be built in classrooms, sports fields, and everyday conversations. It will be built when ordinary people like ourselves start to realize that belonging matters more than being right. My awa has taught me that sometimes strength is flowing, sometimes strength is patience. So let us be like Naruroro. Let us flow, let us listen, so that one day no young person in Aotearoa will ever have to question whether they are enough.
When I was a child, I would watch my father light the fire in our fireplace through the cold winter months. He carefully built the fire, letting it breathe and grow. The fire would begin small and with attention and care, roar to life, filling the room with warmth. As I grew older, my father asked me to help tend to this fire. I learned to add wood at just the right moments, adjust the airflow, and watch for sparks that might go astray. Through this simple act, my father taught me something important. A fire does not survive on its own. It must be listened to, nurtured, and understood. In many ways, this is how culture, identity, and understanding work in our society today. Every tradition, every community, every person's voice is a flame that deserves attention, care, and understanding. Whakarongo kia marama, listen to understand. Every culture is like a burning fire, kept alive by the warmth of our ancestors and the light of our history. This fire guides each and every one of us through the darkness. Even when the winds of prejudice blow, even when society tries to smother it, this fire can survive if we choose to tend to it. Listening is how we tend to these fires. Listening to understand is different from listening to reply or rebut. We are not listening to argue or to prove a point or to assert ourselves. We are listening to truly grasp someone else's experience. This kind of listening allows someone else's fire to grow. Even small questions like asking someone where they are from helps improve racial unity in Aotearoa. Listening to someone else's story is the first step towards deeper understanding and ultimately stronger racial unity. I have seen what happens when we fail to listen, when voices are dismissed, identities ignored, the fire struggles to survive. I have seen it within my own family. My koro and nan were smacked and beaten for speaking their native tongue in school. Their silenced voices were like fires hidden behind glass, still present but starved of the air they need to thrive. From them I learned to listen deeply, to act when I see injustice, and to protect others' voices. Their fires still burn within me. I saw the failure of listening again as a child when a group in my community was targeted simply for their religion. In 2019, when I was only 9 years old, 51 Muslims were murdered in the Christchurch shootings. E kore rātou e ngaro I te mahara. They will never be forgotten in our memory, and their fires continue to burn. Failing to listen is so evident in our society today. Across the world, voices are being silenced and leaders are failing to listen. In the United States, immigrants and refugees are often treated as problems rather than people, meaning their stories and their voices go unheard. Leaders are building walls, dividing instead of uniting. ICE is detaining US citizens using excessive force just because of their ignorant fears of people different from themselves. Just imagine if leaders could actively set up meetings with communities that are directly affected, then policies could reflect care and humanity. The statistics are stark. Māori, Pacifica, Asian, African, European, and many other groups navigate systems that were not built for equality. Māori make up less than 1/5 of the population, yet still account for half of those in prison. Māori and Pacifica students are less likely to achieve their NCA qualifications. And 1 in 3 New Zealanders have reported facing some type of racism, with Māori, Pacifica, and Asian people disproportionately affected. Behind every statistic is a person whose fire has been ignored. Whakarongo kia marama, we must listen, we must understand. Listening is not passive, it requires effort and humility. To truly listen to understand, we must put aside any assumptions and genuinely listen to someone's story before judging them. This reduces isolation, making them feel heard. We can learn from leaders who tended to the fires of their community in the face of oppression. In Waitaiki and Porirua in 2018, Multicultural New Zealand gathered people from Māori, Pacifica, Asian, African and Tau iwi communities together with police and iwi representatives. In these sessions, people came to speak, to listen and understand perspectives different from their own. This fostered understanding and empathy within those communities. From this act, Porerua and Waitaki established councils which work together to develop local action plans against racism called NAPA. The councils have also held events to celebrate International Language Week and organises cultural competency training to help raise awareness in the workplace. Actively seeking out and engaging with the community is just one way leaders can show and demonstrate what it means to listen, to understand. Leaders in schools and workplace can demonstrate listening to understand as well. In doing so, they can create environments where every student and every employee feels valued and feels a true sense of belonging. Students, imagine a world where at the age of 5 you felt a sense of belonging in your school because your principal and your teachers encouraged you to share your traditions with the class and truly respected your cultures. Just coming together tonight is one example of how we can listen and understand. By coming together and listening to the words of 8 students across Te Matawa Māui Hawke's Bay, each person in this room has embodied what it truly means to listen, to understand. I stand here today with the strength of my tipuna and their fires burning within me. I carry the legacy of my Cook Island ancestors from the village Arorangi in Rarotonga. I carry the legacy of my Māori tipuna who first came to Aotearoa over 700 years ago. And I carry the history of my European heritage from the first settlers who came to New Zealand. This is only my story. Each person in this room has their own story, their own fire. I challenge every person here today to take what we have discussed in this very room out into the community. Look at other people's fires. As this whakatauki reminds us, mā te rongo ka mahio, mō te mohio ka mātou, mā te mātou ka marama, mā te marama ka ora. Through listening comes awareness, through awareness, knowledge, through knowledge, enlightenment, and through enlightenment, well-being. Listening to understand is not just a skill. It is our responsibility. It is the fuel that keeps the flames of culture, empathy, and justice alive. Just as my father taught me that we must tend to a fire to keep it alive, each one of us must act and use our voices to protect our cultures so their fires can thrive. Whakarongo kia marama, listen to understand, so we can tend to the fires of our cultures. Kia ora.
In Aotearoa, there are many kinds of birds. Whakakapo, tui, kia, of course the kiwi, and many more. All these native birds make their own different and unique sounds, each with their own pitch, tone, and beauty. But with so many different aspects in each bird's sound, you may think to yourself, they don't belong in the same song. They couldn't blend. They're too different. They can't achieve something as great as harmony. But is this true? E koe koe te tui, e kete kete te kaka, e kuku te kereru. The tui squawks, the kaka chatters, and the kereru coos. Unity between the tui, kaka, and kereru, though they are different species, in the bush, they can create harmony. Just imagine the coos of the kereru, the squawks of the tui, and the chatters of the kaka. Some way, somehow, their voices start to synchronize. Their tones and rhythms slowly start to follow. Visualize as these independent and very different voices start to come together in a beautiful chaos. These polyphonic sounds create a truly unique and Kiwiana harmony. But how can a bird song help with the many racial problems in Aotearoa today, where our communities face natural biases, prejudice, and racism? Well, sit back, relax, and let me tell you. In Aotearoa, as well as a variety of native birds, there are also many different racial and ethnic groups with their own whakapapa, traditions, and religious beliefs. Māori, Indian, Pacifica, Asian, and many more. At first, like our native fauna, the differences seem vast. But the first step to improving racial harmony in Aotearoa starts with our kāringas. We need to genuinely listen to one another, not to rebut or to criticise, but to truly hear all of someone's perspectives, beliefs, and emotions.
Sorry. Right.
If you were to walk up to your friend from another culture and ask for their religious beliefs or traditions, you would genuinely listen because you care for them. You will now understand more about that person. You will understand the things they do, say, or wear, and most importantly, why. If you were to look to your right, do you know anything about that person? Do you care? Genuine listening means to genuinely care for others. Genuine listening is when we prioritize each unique voice instead of wanting to not hear our own, instead of wanting to just hear our own. It's when our voices start to synchronize with one another. An action that must follow is to consider someone's perspectives and emotions and to respect them. See, there's casually hearing someone, and then there is truly respecting their beliefs. Respecting means accepting. Our beliefs will be polar to some, but we need to show respect. Respect for people's whakapapa, respect for traditions, respect for religious beliefs. And slowly, the tones of our voices start to come together. We will start to blend. To reach true harmony, we must make sure everyone in Aotearoa is aware of this very important listening and respecting process. One day, I was walking around when I saw an Indian man wearing his turban. Nothing out of the ordinary. But a group of people, I'm sure didn't know why he wore a turban, started insulting him. And I just stood there wondering why. Why insult someone for a deeply rooted tradition they have? I'm ashamed to say I did not intervene. I just stood there, shocked and upset. So, if everyone in Aotearoa knew how to listen to each other, and even in this case stopped to ask a question, then we can all learn to respect. Respect is a process. If we try, we can reach a society where natural biases and prejudices are no more. We can achieve racial harmony. With a plan to improve racial harmony in Aotearoa, we can help those who deal with the challenges of diversity and isolation in our society every day, because there is suffering. A report from the Ministry of Health in 2024 says that 1 in 10 adults experience racial discrimination. This was mainly in the form of verbal abuse and, in extreme cases, physical abuse. This is a current problem. A little under 300,000 people in 2024 experience racism. So will we just stand here quietly and do nothing? Again, with our plan, if I won't fully snuff out racism overnight, it will help. I can see a future where everyone in this great country can feel more welcomed. Welcome to share a part of themselves with others and not to feel judged. Welcome to visit any business or workplace. Welcome to be themselves. Mā te rongo ka mōhio, mā te mōhio ka mātou, mā te mātou ka marama, mā te marama ka ora. Through listening comes awareness. Through awareness, knowledge. Through knowledge, enlightenment. And through enlightenment, well-being. We can all use a little more awareness, a little more knowledge, and a little more well-being. None of us are perfect. Martin Luther King once said, people fail to get along with each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they haven't communicated with each other. And communicating just means talking and listening. So, the next time you're in the bush, surrounded by nature, remember the lesson of our native birds. Individually they sound nice, but blended together with all the voices of the kakapo, tui, kereru, and even the chikikia, they can create a beautiful, unique, and chaotic harmony. In order to truly be Kiwi, we must embrace all voices in Aotearoa and truly listen.
Waiting in a hall, the orchestra meets, the instruments are ready, and everyone takes a seat. The flutes glimmered, and the trumpets stood tall, the violins held their bows, and a hush rang amongst the hall. Arms outstretched, the conductor begins. A screeching dissonance makes everyone's head spin. The violins screamed, refusing to hear, while the drums struck so loud they bellowed with fear. The flutes trilled high but faded away. The orchestra simply went astray. Each instrument vied to prove they were right, and with such speed they began to fight. The rhythm crumbled and the melody died, if only they played in harmony that night. Listening is pivotal for society, as it helps us become more harmonious. Like the enchanting music played by an orchestra, the shrill chirping between birds in the trees, or the sequences of songs sung by the whales in the deep sea, and ourselves with our mouths speaking to one another. Yet, a problem that I see and hear in our society is that we do not always listen to understand, we listen to reply. Abdul Baha wrote, "When you meet those whose opinions differ from your own, do not turn away your face from them. All are seeking truth, and there are many roads leading thereto. Truth has many aspects, but it remains always and forever one." Everyone from every culture will travel on various roads. Along the way, each road will carry history. Jagged valleys winding along the landscape, mountains towering over you, or the flat, grassy plainlands. And each road will carry struggles with them, whether it's migration, colonization, or privilege. We must acknowledge that our road is not the only road, as each one will reveal a different truth. I was not born here. I was born in Sri Lanka, so the road I travel on has obstacles of migration. There always seemed to be a voice whispering in my ear, saying that I don't belong anywhere. I seem too Sri Lankan for New Zealand, but too Kiwi for Sri Lanka. At the age of 7, I attended the citizenship ceremony, where it was a moment of quiet anticipation and belonging. My family and I sat amongst others wearing their cultural clothes, some wearing lava lavas, others wearing saris. The room seemed to pulse with diversity. As I waited before I walked across the stage, I thought about how the certificate I would receive would be more than just a paper, but a key that would make my discrimination and unfairness slowly decrescendo away. Oh, how I was wrong. Although the certificate I received meant I was legally part of Aotearoa, I was still treated as a cacophonous instrument within the orchestra. When I was younger, I would take rice and curry to school, blind to the judgment I would face by my peers that day. They scowled and grimaced when I opened my lunchbox, asking why it smelled that way and how I could eat it if it was so smelly. The next day, when my amma asked me again, I hung my head in shame and hid away from her gaze, too upset to let her know how I truly felt. Instead, I simply said, "Can I please have a sandwich?" I felt like I had to camouflage myself into a sea of white to truly feel accepted in New Zealand. But today, I carry no shame in bringing my lunches to school. They would ask, "Wow, what is that you're eating?" Or "That smells so good." Or "Did your family teach you to make that?" More and more of my friends have asked me about my culture, the traditions that shape my home, the flavors of my food. They took up the courage to ask me about myself, and I began to feel appreciated because they simply had the bravery to start the melody. I think appreciation comes with listening, as it's a way to see someone's world through their set of eyes. Just asking respectful questions about their differences can foster appreciation for someone's culture and help them see that they do belong. The beauty of this world is the differences of cultures coming together. It's the color of music that comes alive. If we were all the same, the world would lose its timbre, its texture, its soul. According to 2024 surveys, verbal abuse is the most common type of racial discrimination, with Māori and Asian people experiencing the most discrimination. 51 Muslim individuals were murdered in cold blood in a Christchurch mosque in 2019 just because of their beliefs. A South Asian bus driver had his teeth smashed out while being called a servant in 2024. An East Asian teenager was hit with a metal rod on public transportation in 2024. My question is, when will this end? The problem is that racism thrives on the distance that we put between ourselves as a community. When we listen to rebut, we are preparing our defense while the other person is still speaking. Our minds are closed, even if our ears are open. Listening out for prejudice and taking action takes extreme courage and bravery. Most people around me strive to take small steps of courage in an environment ticking with ignorance. That is unity, coming together and putting a stop to the harms in our society, and I urge you to do the same. An orchestra cannot produce a sound so full and strident without sheet music, a balanced sound across all sections, and truly listening to the instruments around them. Understanding our world helps us expand our minds beyond our familiar tune. As we learn more about the world's traditions and interchanging perspectives of others, we create an artistry with emotional depth and colour flowing through the air. The soul yearns for music just as society yearns for unity. As well as learning about maths, science and literature, schools should be teaching how to foster empathy by integrating education about minorities' pasts, traditions and perspectives. We should be teaching children not to judge, but to listen and understand, and not be fearful of discordance. A stubborn and insensitive person who has no interest or willingness to learn or accept a culture is like a dull tune lacking soul. It won't touch the heart in the same way a song full of vibrancy and life will. The political climate of our society has gotten so out of hand, where world leaders generalize a whole community of people based on their skin color and the stereotypes built around them. They're blaring instruments, refusing to harmonize with the orchestra, placing walls between the sections and prohibiting them from listening to the tune. Absurd ideologies like these can have a negative effect on countries like Aotearoa. and we must be careful we don't move further away from being a racially harmonious society. We all have the competence and intelligence to listen and understand what people have to say, but people choose to ignore and limit themselves. We must accept that Aotearoa is becoming more and more diversified, and we must strive towards a more blended and euphonious orchestra. The orchestra gathered again under a golden light, each instrument prepared to play in the night. The violins sang with a silvery sound, while the tubas rumbled a noise so profound. The flutes flew across the hall like a breeze in the trees, while the drums played a tempo as steady as the seas. No sound tried to vanquish, no instrument began to rule. For each player listened, they would be no fool. And then in the hall, the notes took flight. The contrasts grew into colours of light. And so the symphony played for all to see. Together, our differences create harmony. Thank you.
When I was a kid, my brown skin and my turban were often the first things people saw. Before my voice, before my name. Sometimes those first impressions turned into words that reached me only to remind me that I was different. And when that happened, I would go quiet. And sometimes, somewhere inside myself, I still wonder, why didn't I stand up to racism? Why didn't I free myself from the shackles of my skin, rid myself of this burden I was born with, the burden of my colour? Some days I didn't have it in me to fight. Some days I'd rather just be a human than a hero. So as a kid, I learned to turn these closed hands into promises and swallow these fists of anger back into the silence from which they were born. And from that silence, I chose to use love as my weapon. My father taught me about love. He inspires me. He came to New Zealand carrying in his suitcase a history, a culture, and a desire for a better life. When he arrived, he met stares, silence, and even words that tried to make him smaller. But he never let them. And when I would tell my father at school, hands reach out in disrespectful curiosity to touch my turban, he would remind me, son, they can put a hand on your history, but they can never touch your soul. So I stand here the same way he did, 26 years ago, unmoved, unfazed, and unbroken, wearing proudly both my past and my pride. My father, he speaks in the language of resilience, tongue heavy with sacrifice, yet light enough to carry the weight of me to a future he never had. Through his tired limbs of labour's weight, he stitched wings from worn-out dreams. My dad taught me to fly, taught me to listen. But outside that love, the world can feel much different. Like a courtroom. In a courtroom, two witnesses can watch the same event and have two different stories. And in real life, two people can meet the same person and have two different views. So how do we know who's right? In the courtroom of life, we don't listen to others. We listen instead to a version of them we've built from our first glance. And when we do this, we replace people with our expectations of them. In the courtroom of life, the most powerful moment isn't when someone speaks. It's when someone feels believed. In our society, too many people are unheard and isolated because their stories are filtered through stereotypes. A 2021 Ministry of Health survey found that the most common form of racism is verbal racism. Words spoken before anyone takes the time to listen. That is a challenge in Aotearoa today. As a kid, I used to mistake assimilation for belonging, thinking that the price of being let in was to let go of parts of myself, to smooth my edges until I fit a shape the world would find less threatening, less difference. Whakarongo ki a marama, listening to understand, changes everything. When we listen beyond what we see, we break down the barriers that create isolation and replace them with genuine connection.
There is a powerful difference between listening to rebut and listening to understand. Now, let me show you what I mean. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a taxi driver, a fast food worker, someone stacking shelves late at night. Now ask yourself, who did you see? Because I never described the face, and yet most of us saw colour. How do we confront racism if we can't even recognise it in ourselves? For that answer, we can look again at a courtroom. The problem in society is that too many of us listen like lawyers, listen waiting for our turn to challenge, waiting for flaws, waiting to defend what we think we know. That's listening to rebut, not listening to understand. Instead of listening like lawyers, we must listen like judges. Judges are trained to recognise their bias, to set aside assumptions, to remove personal filters before reaching a verdict. That's listening to understand. In a courtroom, if a judge was to decide the verdict before hearing the evidence, the trial becomes meaningless. And in life, if I've already decided who you are before you've spoken, then my listening is just a performance, a waste of time. Diversity alone does not create racial harmony. You can put 100 different voices in the same room and still have no understanding. Racial harmony isn't built by pretending we're all the same. It's built when we take responsibility for the assumptions we all carry. Prejudice survives when stereotypes go unchallenged. Challenging stereotypes means questioning the stories we've been taught about others. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And perhaps one of the simplest ways we bring light to this world is by learning to truly listen. One way we can do this is through a government-backed, youth-led national initiative, a digital platform where students share their whakapapa to teach others about their culture. When we learn about others, not only do we break down stereotypes, but we create empathy. In schools, cultural understanding must be active through workshops led by young people, for young people. When youth lead the conversation, we don't just create unity, we create a national dialogue that builds racial harmony. Understanding becomes acceptance. Listening alone is not enough. A courtroom without a verdict changes nothing. The action that must follow listening is change. If I was to listen to your story and nothing about me changed, then I just listened. I never understood. Listening to understand will always leave evidence behind. Evidence like challenging a stereotype instead of choosing silence. Standing up for someone when they're made to feel different. In the courtroom of life, after every voice has been heard, after every story has been told, a verdict must still be made. But no trial is perfect, and often the trial reveals less about the person on the stand and more about the integrity of the one listening. Life is no different. Every day in the quiet courtrooms of our own conversations, we form our own verdicts, sometimes before the first word is even spoken. Gal sun ke hi gal samjh aunਦੀ है. Only by listening can a message truly be understood. When I was young, my skin was my burden. Now it's my blessing. I've come to realize we must learn to listen beyond what we see. Because in the courtroom of life, every assumption is a verdict. And a verdict once delivered is hard to overturn. Whakarongo ki a marama, listening to understand, doesn't end with judgment. It begins with responsibility. A shared responsibility. To pause before we decide. Listen before we judge. Not to respond. Not to defend. But to truly understand.
Mā te rongo ka mōhio. ma te mohi o ka mātou, ma te mātou ka marama, ma te marama ka ora. Through listening comes awareness. Through awareness, knowledge. Through knowledge, understanding. And through understanding, well-being. I whānau au ki Dubai, he uri aho na Philippines. I tai mai ki Aotearoa tata ki te whā tau ki muri. Ke here taunga aho e noho ana, he akonga ha ato ke hatahoani. Ko Sean Fernandez toko ingoa. Now if you walked into my bedroom, you'd see Polaroid certificates and a calendar trying to keep my life in order. Like everyone, I like to circle dates. I like to circle birthdays, rehearsals, socials, maybe even a date with a special somebody. Yet, one circle is different. December 28, 2026, the day my visa expires. I circled it in red the moment I found out. I pressed it harder than I needed to. Hard enough to leave a dent onto January. I did not cry. I did not panic. I just stared. It is strange to see your belonging reduced to a date. Now, when I first came here to New Zealand, I expected the familiarity of Dubai to follow me. I expected a country which calls itself multicultural to feel the same. Now, at first it did. New uniform, new classes, polite enough questions. One of them being now. One afternoon, we were having a discussion in class about summer holidays to come. I mentioned that I was visiting family in the Philippines. Then somebody said, "So, are you really staying here, like, permanently?" I responded back saying, "Yeah, I hope so." They said, "Yeah, it's just because, you're not really from here." It was not violent. It was not a slur. It was casual. And somehow, that made it even more heavier. When belonging feels conditional, we begin to see it as an equation. We see it in ways that other people never have to be. We measure words, we measure sentences, we measure jokes in ways other people never have to. The next day, we had a discussion in school talking about immigration. Somebody mentioned New Zealand should probably be stricter. Now, before they even finished, I interrupted. I bursted out, talked to them, and said no. Walking home that afternoon, I had realized something uncomfortable. I had become the very thing I resented. I had not listened to understand. I had listened to rebut and defend. The next day, I tried something different. I walked up to that person and asked, "What do you mean?" The next step I took was quite surprising. I stayed quiet and listened to hear their response. They talked about rent. They talked about jobs. They talked about rising costs of butter. They talked about their own fears. They weren't describing me. They were describing their own uncertainties and insecurities. Now, listening did not change his earlier comments. Listening did not excuse it either, but rather it changed what came next. For listening is not meant to be some sort of agreement you come to. Listening is inquiry. Listening is the choice to pause before reducing someone to a single sentence. There are quiet red circles everywhere in our schools. 1 in 5 ethnic students face race-based bullying every day in Aotearoa. Sounds dire or desperate, does it? Yet it exists in names called without permission, in teachers mispronouncing it and moving on, in the silence and hesitation that it takes for someone to speak their own language, their own tone, their own selves in class. Yet why should I fear myself? It is true. These moments seem small, but they accumulate. And suddenly belonging begins to feel like some sort of equation you have to solve in order to survive. Yes, we especially must listen to the people who hold differing or opposing views from us. Again, not to excuse them, and neither to accept them, but to understand the fears and misunderstandings that sustain them. Because prejudice rarely survives careful listening. Listening plants small seeds, small patient interventions that over time help grow and break the cycles of misunderstanding. It turns witnesses into participants. It turns silence into responsibility. It turns casual comments into opportunities for growth. That is the work we should endeavour to do in our schools today. Through peer-led environments, students learn the importance of active listening. They learn the importance of saying somebody's name correctly. They learn how to be themselves. Not in the fear of being misunderstood, but in the moment of being understood. The goal here is simple. Tiny, repeatable acts. Correct that joke. Say that name properly. And ask the question that opens up a conversation rather than shutting one down. Sean, do you really think this is going to change anything? Yeah. New Zealand is far too racist. Yeah, right. Yeah, wrong. We as a society will never grow, will never flourish. History asserts that all societies, our Aotearoa included, will never flourish through empty, large promises. It is built through growth. It is built through change. And how else do we do that without the small steps we take along the way? Correct that joke. Say that name properly. Learn to understand that listening holds importance, not just to yourself, but to the person in front of you. Now, I still have that red circle on my calendar. I haven't erased it, and neither have I replaced it with maybe even a better or brighter color. But it doesn't feel so scary anymore, but rather it feels like a reminder on how incredibly fragile belonging may seem to be, but how so incredibly powerful it can truly be when it is built through listening, understanding, and growth. Ma te rongo ka mohio, ma te mohio ka mātou. Ma te mātou ka marama, ma te marama ka ora. Through listening comes awareness. Through awareness comes knowledge. Through knowledge comes understanding. And through understanding comes well-being. Now, do you see a red circle in me? Maybe you see one in the person beside you. Or maybe you see it in yourself. Maybe, maybe not. It all depends if you've listened or listened to understand. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, katoa. Kia ora.
When was the last time you truly listened to someone you disagreed with? And I don't mean while preparing your reply. Not to defend, not to correct yourself, and not to win, but to understand. Let me be direct with you. Racism did not always begin with hatred. More often, it begins with misunderstanding, and misunderstanding grows when people refuse to listen. Events like the Race Unity Speech Awards create space for conversations like this, and that matters. But let me be honest. The people in this room are already willing to listen. The people who most need to hear these conversations are not here, which means the responsibility to carry these messages depend on us. Aotearoa is one of the most diverse countries in the world. So many cultures, so many languages, so many identities. But diversity alone does not create unity. Unity comes from understanding, and understanding begins with using your ears.
Yet many young people still feel unheard, unseen, disconnected from the very communities they belong to. So the issue is not diversity, the issue is how we listen. Because most of us are not listening to understand. We are listening to respond, to defend, to protect what we already believe. But real listening is different. It takes discipline, it asks us to pause, to question ourselves, and to accept the fact that someone else's truth may not look like our own. And when we fail to do that, misunderstanding doesn't just grow, it shapes history. In 1840, Rangatira and the British Crown signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Two versions, one agreement. But those versions did not say the same thing. The English text claimed sovereignty was handed over completely. The Māori text spoke of kāwangatanga, governance, not total control. And while Māori were promised tino rangatiratanga, full authority over their land and taonga, that meaning was never fully carried into the English version. Same document, different understandings. And when people believed they agreed on the same thing, but didn't, the consequences were generational. Land was taken, communities were displaced, trust between Te Ao Māori and Te Ao Pākehā were broken, all from a failure to truly understand each other. That is the cost of not listening. Mā te rongo ka mōhio, mā te mōhio ka mātou, mā te mātou ka marama, mā te marama ka ora. Through listening comes awareness. Through awareness comes knowledge. Through knowledge comes enlightenment, and through enlightenment, well-being. Our tupuna knew this, but we are still catching up. As a young Māori wahine, I've seen what happens when people speak about us, but do not truly listen. Being invited to the table is not the same as being valued, and being valued is not the same as being understood. Because a seat at the table means nothing if everyone is only willing to consume their own perspective. Right now, we are treating listening like a weapon. We listen for mistakes, for moments for something to challenge, and for the moment we can prove someone wrong. But listening was never meant to be ammunition. Listening is a bridge, and bridges are not built by shouting across the river. They are built by meeting in the middle. Look around us. In Parliament, we sit on opposite sides of the chamber. In classrooms, we sit on opposite sides of the debates. Behind screens, we are quicker to type than we can try to understand. Different spaces, same behaviour. So what does it look like when I mention meeting in the middle? Because it's easy to stand here and say, just listen better. It's harder to show what that means. If our leaders want to model listening to understand, it starts with something simple, and honestly, something we don't do enough. Ask a question and don't interrupt. In schools, it looks like teachers making space for students to share their experiences without rushing to correct them. In workplaces, it looks like leaders admitting, I don't fully understand. Can you help me? Which, by the way, is not a weakness. That's leadership. In communities, it looks like actually showing up, not just speaking at people, but sitting with them. And in the government, it looks like consultation that isn't just a checkbox exercise. Because let's be real, sending out a survey and never changing anything, that's not listening. I call that Google Forms with attitude. Real listening means being willing to be changed by what you hear. And that leads to the second challenge. How do we create anti-racism that actually brings people together instead of pushing them further apart? Because right now, a lot of conversation about racism feels like battles. And when people feel attacked, they don't listen, they defend themselves. So if we want connection, we have to change the approach. Call people in before you call them out. That doesn't mean ignoring racism, it means creating space for people to learn without the fear of being shut down instantly. Because you cannot educate someone if they are too busy if they are too busy being embarrassed to hear you. Anti-racism is not just about correcting their behaviour, it's about building understanding. It looks like, why do you think that? Instead of, that's wrong. It looks like conversations, not cancellations, because cancelling someone might feel powerful in the moment, but it really changes them. And if nothing changes, what was the point? Real change happens in connection. It happens when people feel safe enough to be honest and brave enough to be challenged. It happens slowly, and yes, sometimes awkwardly. Because real conversations about race, they're not always smooth. Sometimes you say the wrong thing, sometimes you get it wrong. But growth lives in that discomfort. Not in the silence, not in the avoidance, but in choosing to stay in the conversation anyway. And I see it in my generation. We screenshot instead of seeking clarity. We cancel instead of having conversation. And we defend ourselves instead of asking questions. And then we wonder why we feel so disconnected. But you cannot build connection if everyone is waiting for their turn to speak. Listening is like a muscle. If we train ourselves to argue, we get stronger at division. If we train ourselves to understand, we get stronger at unity. So yes, I challenge our leaders, but I also challenge you. Because you decide whether you repeat what you see or change it. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you changed your mind? Not because you were embarrassed, not because you were forced to, but because you truly listened. Because understanding takes courage. And if we find that courage, we won't just pass perspectives, we will shape our future. So the next time someone asks us, where are you really from? Don't shrink. Don't shut down. Instead, stand in who you are. And then meet them in the middle. Not by accepting ignorance, but by challenging it with understanding. Not by staying silent, but by choosing to start a conversation they may have never had. Because meeting in the middle is not about diminishing yourself. It's about making the space between you smaller. Because that is where unity begins. Because unity is not built when one side wins. It is built when both sides are willing to move. So I'll leave you with this. The future of Aotearoa will not be decided by how loudly you speak, but by how deeply you are willing to listen. Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, let it also be the land where we listen long enough to understand, to stand together, and to move forward as one. Tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa.
What a remarkably difficult job. And I know you were thinking we all want to get home, but honestly, it's tough.
It's really tough.
It is
Each year it's more difficult.
just wonderful. We're going to share a little bit of feedback. We'll be succinct. We've worked on that. And I'm going to ask Riz to begin. We'll go in the sequence of our speakers just to give a little bit of feedback to them.
So our first speaker, Tendai, as we call your name, you would come and get your certificate, please.
Come and stand with us.
We really liked your theme about the words and how words can hurt more than bullets. And the term Ubuntu, I can relate to that. So thank you.
Thank you. Delighted to hear you tonight. Tendai, thank you.
And at the end, we'll have everybody up here to take a group photo. Jake?
Jake, we really love your river metaphor. It clearly came from the heart of Tari o Pepeha, and you rounded into your speech really well to explain what you do. We also liked your your perspective and your true stories from the heart. And quite here, no one needs to question whether they are enough. And that's really powerful. So, thank you.
Audrey. We loved the fire image. It's particularly because you were talking about it being passed on, how you learned about building that fire, and then the image of the fire continued through. It was a beautifully designed speech and well presented. Key thing, listening to someone makes their fire grow. Beautifully done. Audrey, thank you.
Next up is one more two. One more two. We like that analogy of the birds, how each one has their own voice, but together they can work in harmony. Well done.
Thank you.
Certainly, we loved your orchestra metaphor. It was really well done. It was really poetic.
Yeah, rhyming,
and your personal story as well, about the reactions of your peers to your lunch and how that made you feel. It just felt really heartfelt, and yeah, we really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Alan Joe. I loved how you use the court system and its verdict and applied that to personal judgment. We form our own verdict before we've heard a word. Love the personal story that you shared about your dad and recognising your dad because of the spiritual values he operates with as teacher. Beautiful. We've enjoyed it very much. We also really liked the idea of the youth-led national initiative online sharing, asking questions and responding to those questions about culture. Well done.
We have Sean.
Wonderful.
Sean, you are so right that our perception of people should not be based on our visa.
And anyway, your speech was right throughout it. Was littered with powerful messages, and your insight that you delivered to us today was quite extraordinary. Things like growth lives in discomfort. Your themes around challenging thoughts in a positive and respectful way.
Thank you all for your attendance and patience with us. It is for us now to announce first the runner-up for the Hawke's Bay Regional Race Unity Speech Awards 2026. This person is to attend the Auckland finals if our winner is not able to make it. Our runner-up for this year, Audrey. Stand with us, dear Anne. And the winner for 2026, Amanjot Singh. We'll bring it to the school. And Amanjot, here you go. Congratulations, you're going to represent us well. Lovely.
So, congratulations to all the students for their courage, insight and hard work preparing these speeches. Race unity is a concept that we all contribute to. A suggestion is please don't just let these speeches stay in this room tonight. Please share them at your school or share them on other occasions and other spaces. We need these thoughts heard out there. Like one of you mentioned, everyone here already kind of agrees to these things. So we need to actually spread this outside of this hall. And yes, reminding everyone that these speech awards are held in support of Race Relations Day. And let's think about ways that we can foster positive race relations in our school communities, in our clubs, in our workplaces, everywhere that we are. Thank you to all the speakers tonight. You were all amazing. I agree with the judges that it was very hard this year. The caliber was just top tier. Thank you to all the support people, all the parents and aunties and uncles and everyone who listened to the speeches getting practiced. Special thank you to the teachers who support these programs at your schools. And special thank you to the judges. It's a super hard job. You did an amazing job at that. And our timekeeper, Ty. And another final thank you to the Baha'i Faith, to the New Zealand Police, to the Multicultural New Zealand, and to all of our other sponsors and supporters. Thank you, everyone.